What's up, YouTube? My name is Rob Guillory, and this is my YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in. The purpose of this channel is to encourage, inspire, and hopefully give insight into what can be sort of a crazy making industry. As always, I'm talking about comics. So this week, I want to dip into perfectionism. Now, I think we as creators all want to put our best possible work out into the world, but I think there can come a point in time where we can take that to an unhealthy level and we start saying things to ourselves like, well, if it's not absolutely 100% perfect, I don't want to put it out into the world at all. And I think that can be sort of unhealthy for us. It can freeze us and hold us hostage to unrealistic expectations for ourselves and what we make. And it's something I wrestle with many times over the years. And I've come up with a few little mindset shifts that have helped me to get over that as it comes up over the years. So I want to dip into that today. Let's jump right into that as I work on some commissions, as always. And I'll check you on the other side. Back when I was just starting my journey in the comics, there were tons of little odd jobs I'd take to help make ends meet. One time I drew caricatures at a bar mitzvah, which was a really cool experience and one I'll never forget. Another time I drew portraits on ceramic mugs at an oil field convention, which was a really weird experience I'd probably be okay with forgetting. But the gig I held on to the longest was teaching. Once or twice a week, I'd meet with a small group of middle school kids and introduce them to the fundamentals of making comics. Or at least that's what I attempted to do. Honestly, most of the time, I was just trying to navigate the complex and often very dramatic emotional lives of kids who were just on the brink of puberty. In other words, it was a lot of kids just being kids. It was somewhere between a comic class and some kind of preteen soap opera. And I was only in my early 20s at the time. I hadn't spent much time around kids, so I probably learned more than they did. And I've always been a people watcher, and these kids were absolutely fascinating to me, if occasionally maddening. And some of the kids were absolute naturals. They had the type of raw talent that I had at a very young age as well. They just needed a pencil, some paper, and a little bit of guidance, and they just flourished. And it was a really special thing to be a part of. But from time to time, I'd have a student who was that kid. And if you've ever been a teacher, you know that kid that I'm talking about. This kid was obviously very bright, had a great sense of humor, and clearly had a very great future ahead of them. But this was also the same kid who rarely ever picked up a pencil in the entire time he was in my class. This kid would just sit there, cracking jokes and disrupting my class. In every class, I try to give this kid a little push, encourage them to channel their humor into the work. But it just never worked, and it used to drive me absolutely crazy. Then one class, everything became very, very clear. One class, I watched this kid finally pick up the pencil for the very first time, scribble for a few seconds, then put it down moments later, and immediately just start cracking jokes. And as I looked at the expression on the kid's face, I realized the reason he never picked up a pencil in my class wasn't because he was lazy. I realized that the kid's jokes were just cover for something else. And I realized then that the reason he never picked up the pencil was because he'd already decided that nothing he'd ever draw would be good enough. This poor 12-year-old had already decided nothing would ever be good enough, so why try at all? And it blew me away that such a young kid could declare something so final. And it's something I think about all the time. The truth is, I've seen that same look, that look of surrender and disappointment, over and over again in many creatives over the years. And frankly, I've struggled with it from time to time. And it was a while before I found out that this struggle actually had a name: perfectionism. So I Googled the actual definition of perfectionism, and oddly enough, there wasn't a perfect definition. But the Merriam-Webster one is actually pretty good. Basically, perfectionism is a disposition to regard anything short of perfection as unacceptable. In other words, it won't be good enough, so why try at all? Now, here's the thing. My struggle with perfectionism hasn't been a constant fight. I've had long seasons of my life where it wasn't a thing at all. I have no memories of dealing with this as a kid or a teenager. Really, the first memory I have of dealing with this was in college, just as I was starting to connect with other comic creators online in the early 2000s. I'd managed to hook up with a young writer, and together we were making this crazy, huge graphic novel. And really, this project, which will remain nameless to protect the innocent, this project was huge for my development as an artist. So over the course of about 100 pages, I basically developed my signature art style, which was a pretty big deal. The problem was, page 100 was way better than page 1, which is a normal thing. This happens, especially with young artists. As I was finding my way in this early part of my career, I was discovering the drawing techniques that I still use today. My art was growing by leaps and bounds really, really quickly, which again is a good thing. But it also meant that my growth was very obvious over the course of the book. So if you read it, you could literally see my art improve page by page. And this drove me absolutely crazy because it felt like the art was inconsistent. So what was my brilliant solution? I decided to go back to page 1 and redraw the early pages to match the later pages. And I'm sure you see where this is going. I was stuck in this endless loop, trying to capture the perfect page, the perfect consistency of art for this project, and I was leaving absolutely no room for the growth process. And in my search for perfection, my work just totally came to a standstill. Nothing ever got released because I was held hostage by my own perfectionism. And I drove myself and my collaborator absolutely insane. And when the project fell apart, it really wasn't that much of a surprise. And as I've gotten older, this perfectionism loop has popped up from time to time, and it's always the same. I'll get stuck on a script, or stuck on a page of art, or stuck on an idea, and instead of pressing through it, I just freeze. And eventually I always break through it. I'm always successful, but sometimes it takes a while. Now, some of this is my mind trying to work through the problem, but some of this is just me overthinking things to death, which I have been known to do from time to time. In complete transparency here, the more success I have had, the more I have become known as the guy that draws chew, the more I have had to consciously break through those expectations. Because frankly, after you win a few awards or have a best-selling book or have any level of success, it can become very, very easy to start thinking about what other people think of you. And as more people become aware of you, the easier it can be to get frozen in that identity. You can find yourself playing a role rather than just being who you really are. And that's no good. The reality is, I can't make sincere art if I'm shackled by what other people think of me. So I've learned that I need to ignore expectations and focus on the process of making. If I'm so hung up on my own expectations or on other people's expectations of me, then I'm not going to allow myself the space to experiment. And without experimentation, there is no art. Making art is largely about making a mess. And if you watch my videos at all, you'll notice there's a lot of messiness in my process. My art starts out foggy, and then it comes into focus over time. And my scripts are no different. It's a jumble of ideas at first, slowly coming into focus as I work. That only happens if I allow myself the space for imperfection. So I've had to remind myself that the mess is the process. The mess isn't a problem. The mess is the point. So instead of saying, it'll never be good enough, why try at all? I tell myself the mess will make me stronger. The mess, the imperfections of my work are making me a better artist. So it's no longer about perfection for me. I'm seeking growth now, fully believing that the end goal will be worth it. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not aiming for excellence. I want everything that I produce to be excellent. What I'm saying is, if you have to choose between putting out an imperfect but good work into the world, or never putting anything out because it isn't perfect, I think it's better to just put out the imperfect work. Put out the imperfect work, learn from it, and do better next time. Your career isn't only one book. It's not only one painting or one song. Your career is a body of work done over the course of your life. So allow yourself the grace to fail, to learn, and improve. This is something I've even had to do in the making of this channel. To be completely honest, I considered making this channel a long time ago. But I kept telling myself it won't be good enough. You don't know video. You don't know how to talk to a camera. You don't know enough. So why try at all? But last year I made a commitment to myself, and I told myself, this channel is probably going to suck for a while, but then it's going to get really good, and I'm going to learn a lot along the way, so I might as well just enjoy the ride. So if you're hung up on this desire to be perfect, I'd encourage you to give yourself some grace. Whatever you're doing, whether it's art, writing, music, whatever, just commit to the process. Accept that you're going to suck for a while, maybe for years. But know that as you make your mess, you are actually building the foundation for your own mastery. You're learning a skill through the mess. So focus on the skill more than anything else and build the habits. And ignore that little voice in your head that says your art only has value if it's perfect, because that's just not true. So dedicate yourself to the messy process of making things, because that's the most important thing. And in time, I think you'll be amazed at the results. All right, so that brings us to the end of yet another video. I hope, as always, that you got something from it. Like I said, I above all hold myself to a pretty high standard in not just in my art, but in pretty much everything. And more often than not, I've had to learn that I have to give space for the mess, and the mess can be the work, what we put on the page, but can also be just the lives that we live. No one's perfect. We're all kind of trying to navigate this as best as we can. So I think we have to afford grace for the mess and for our own frailties. And I think if we hold ourselves to an unrealistic expectation of always wanting to be perfect, of always wanting to do everything completely right, it can absolutely crush us. It can freeze us from making the stuff that we feel called to do, and it can really take a toll on who we are. So I think we have to give space for imperfections. And this this reminds me a lot of the previous episode I did on collaboration, where you have to give your partner the space to kind of be messy within reason, of course, but you have to afford space for the other person's humanity, essentially. And I think we have to do the same for ourselves. We have to give ourselves grace to work through the process of making whatever we're making, because it's going to be a mess. Nothing's going to exactly line up with what we picture in our heads, which is oftentimes the real struggle for me as an artist, because nothing I make has ever perfectly represented what I have up here. But I have to keep chugging along. I have to keep making stuff, because, at the end of the day, your career does not hinge on one page. One page does not define your career, or one painting does not define your career, or one song, whatever it is, does not define your entire career. It's not about one piece. It's about the entire body of work of your life. So keep that in mind. I think it's sort of liberating to look at it from a bigger perspective rather than a small viewpoint. So look at it from the bigger perspective of your entire life's work. I think that is way more liberating. It gives you a lot more grace for everyday struggles, everyday mistakes, and imperfect work. It's all about the big picture. So keep that in mind. So again, hope that's helpful. Let me know what's going on with you in the comments section. Anywhere I can help you, anywhere I can serve, I'm here for you. Like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube-y stuff. Please, if you know anyone that you think is going to get something out of this, feel free to share it along. I would appreciate it. And I'll catch you next week. Bye.